Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War Frontline update for the 3rd of October, what month, I don't know. 3rd of October 2023, one step closer to Halloween and another step closer to Christmas. Goodness me, time flies. If you want to check out what the lines mean on my map, please pause the video and read the key. Just to let you know that I will get a shareable link. The link to the map will be in Google Maps. I would advise pressing the button at the top of the three dots and say view that in Google Earth. So you view it like this. I think it's just easier. It will look slightly different, but you can play around with it. I'm playing around with that at the moment. It's not fully completed. We still have some issues, JR and I, with regard to some of these lines that are going to be cleared up in good time. So there are some double blue lines. You want to look at the most outward facing ones compared to the Russian lines. Forget the inward facing ones, and we will merge those. But anyway, that's the map as it is at the moment. We've got some pins to look at. Go and check out the live stream last night that I did with Andrew Perpetua, where we talked a lot about the front line. It was quite somber. We were talking about whether the Ukrainians really were going to go much further in their counteroffensive to the south. I think, and I said this weeks back actually, I think that we've entered this phase where they've stopped attacking. You know, at the beginning when they were attacking near Malotokmachka, I'm just going to give you some general kind of counteroffensive thoughts first. They attacked near Malotokmachka, lost a whole bunch of equipment, and then sort of sat back and went, right, we need to do this differently. And that's when they started doing attrition by distance with the use of HIMARS, precision guided munitions from artillery, and using all their ranged artillery and drones really effectively to attrit the Russians. But now we're seeing, I think there's been this pressure to at least make some significant territorial progress. And I don't think they're ready for that. And as a result, they've been throwing soldiers and armor into these trench lines to try and break through the trench lines. And they have been close to a possible sort of collapse at times, I genuinely think. But the Russians have been able to throw everything at these defensive lines. They're just filling these trenches with troops, throwing the equipment here because they don't really care for the lives of their soldiers, it appears. And that means that in order to overcome that, without air force capability, the Ukrainians have to clear those trenches out by hand, by foot, and that is incredibly expensive. So I think the Ukrainians are being attrited themselves. They are attriting the Russians at a greater ratio, but the Russians aren't as concerned, I don't think, at that scenario. I think this is proving too difficult for the Ukrainians, and realistically I would take this time to just stop attacking it. Pretty much in most places you can do little kind of deep reconnaissance groups, probing here, probing there, maybe little attacks, try and find some weaknesses, but in general you just want to spend a couple of months massively attriting the Russian armor and logistics until they get to a point where they have no armor and logistics. And this is what Andrew Perpetua was saying last night. It's a really good point. And once the Russians have been so attrited with precision munitions, then the Ukrainians can just really hit them with electronic warfare to take out the use of any drones. It doesn't matter if the Ukrainians can't use their own drones. At the moment, you have to use electronic warfare quite cleverly because you end up taking out your own drones. Everyone's using so many drones that you have to be quite particular about how you use electronic warfare. Well, if you've got to the point where you've destroyed all the targets you need to destroy, you don't need to use drones yourself. So you hit the skies with electronic warfare, and that means they can't use drones. You can't use drones. They've got no armor left. They've got just troops, and that's when you can more effectively start moving forward. And then you need to obviously have stockpiles of artillery ammunition and mortar ammunition to be able to hit those trench lines with suppressing kind of artillery fire before you try and clear them out. But I think they need to spend a couple more months attriting, and that's kind of what we talked about last night. It's not all like doom and gloom. Ukraine have made some insanely good, successful progress over the last 3 months. They have attrited Russian logistics. They have attrited, as I've said, Russian armor, and they've hit certain targets right back in Crimea, back in Russia. They're doing a really good job in all the ways we would expect them, if they can get ATACMS, GLSDB, F-16s online, ready for, I think, spring next year, ready to go for, early, mid, late spring next year, we could see a really good situation for them. It was Lawrence22 on one of my threads this morning said, and this is a great point. Sorry, I haven't got it up for you, but the point was Ukraine are in a better position now than they were a year ago. So they've got a greater variety of capability, offensive capability, and they're looking to get more online soon. Talking about ATACMS, JDAM, GLSDB in decent quantities, and if they can get Taurus, throw that into, if they can get F-16s, so on and so forth. So they're in a better position now than they were a year ago. And look at where they are compared to a year ago. So they're on the attack, and I don't think Russia can mount a massively significant counterattack themselves. Now, there is talk, we talked last night about how the Russians are shaping in the northeastern sector, and actually they're doing things that aren't being reported widely, but they are hitting places right behind the line. They're hitting Borova, they're hitting a place near Borova as well, which is the sort of thing you would do if you're ready to attack that way in a significant manner. They're hitting bridges and logistics around Kupiansk. They're also doing things to the south and possibly towards Liman as well. So there are indications that the Russians could be readying to mount a significant attack, but I just don't think they have the mass of armor that they would need. Both sides are in a lack of significant amounts of armor situation. I think the Russians are degrading at a rate that is not good for them. I think going forward, it's just going to get worse and worse. And for the Ukrainians, it does depend on how much stuff they can make, but that's not going to come online soon. So it's about how much other nations can give them in terms of large amounts of armor. I've said today, we need to go big or go home. So just give them everything they need now, and not necessarily to use right now, but give them loads of equipment so that come spring next year, they're in such a commanding position, they can really take advantage of that. I think it's now all about prepping up. It's like, what have you learned from this? Counteroffensive has ground to a whole, and you really struggling to get past the fortifications. So the plan needs to be, how do you overcome fortifications in spring next year? What equipment do you need? And let's look at all the equipment you have got and just give you more of that, and just get you to a point where next spring, right, then it all works. Okay, sorry, that's a lot of me just giving you generalized assessments there. Let's go to the Institute for the Study of War, American military think tank, to see what they have to say about the different areas of the front line. And if we go to the northeastern sector, it doesn't really say an awful lot. Talking again about the 25th Combined Arms Army, the elements of them are up there: 41st Combined Arms Army, 76th Air Assault Division. So yeah, there are elements of different groups operating up there, but not really any big news in terms of attacks or territory gained for either side. So that's from Kupiansk to Svatova to Crimea. And then as we come down past, we're going to come down to Sorska, where the only thing that I have heard, and again, does this fit into any kind of imminent counteroffensive? Don't know at all. But Global War Monitor says Russia has advanced slightly towards the villages of Zarychna and Torska. So this is on that salient just to the west of Crimea. Serebryansky Forest here, and just around this area, some possible gains there for the Russians. But other than that, not too much to talk about in that area. So we come down to Bakhmut. Right, as we come to Bakhmut, we'll go to the ISW first. They say Yevlash, who's a spokesperson, said that Russian forces aim to hold the defensive line along the railway south of Bakhmut at any cost. I thought that was interesting, and we kind of have seen this with the nature of the Russian defense, which is counterattack, 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 throw everything at it, can't lose territory. I don't know whether it's like a PR thing or whether it's more of a military tactical thing. I don't know, but they are counter-attacking whenever they lose ground, and that is attritional for the Ukrainians, and it does mean the Ukrainians don't keep their momentum going. So it has that positive effect for the Russians, but the negative effect for the Russians is the attritional nature of counterattacking and taking it to the Ukrainians, and rather than soaking up Ukrainian pressure in your defensive positions, which would possibly give you a better attrition ratio. The Russians aren't doing that. They're taking it to the Ukrainians. So a Russian mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces continued attempts to advance east of the railway line near Andriivka, and that Ukrainian forces hold unspecified, more advantageous positions in the area. So this is Klishchivka here. We have the Ukrainians pushing back, as we can see some Ukrainian gains there. I think I don't know if that's the right color though. Yeah, it is, but it's a Russian. Sorry, I'm getting all my colors muddled up. So the Syriac maps have shown that the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians back across the railway line here. There's been some toing and froing across this railway line over time. There's been quite a lot of lost equipment and personnel all along this railway line, really. But here, Syriac Maps is accepting that the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians back. Let's go and see what they have to say about this area. And indeed, there it is. South of Bakhmut, they say the Ukrainian army is still making small advances close to the railway, and north of Klishchivka, all the attacks around Andriivka were repelled by the Russian army. So further to the south along this railway line, they say the Russian army is repelling Ukrainians. Trent Telenko here says this is no small development, although this is from now the 1st of October. I just missed this one yesterday. The armed forces of Ukraine breached the Russian line behind the railroad east of the recently liberated Andriivka. I posted an update about this earlier this week, but deleted it in order to comply with the Ukrainian OPSEC regime in the region. So there is quite a lot of OPSEC going on that affects a number of different sources. So there's Ukrainians pushing the Russians there and possibly around Andriivka, but none of the map is showing any movements there today. However, north of there, Andrew Perpetua is saying that Ukrainians have made some gains pushing across around these water features of these kind of like reservoirs and ponds. It's quite marshy around here. It dips down there before it goes to a slight incline up to this this road here. So if we look at the actually no, am I wrong? It sort of goes back down. Actually, it looks like the height is 170. It's a bit changeable actually, but it might be that actually this is a higher point just to the west of there. So it's quite variable, but here we've got 157 coming down to 150, 140. So it sort of dips there and then slowly goes up and maybe dips a little as it comes down there. So this could be a bit of a ridge here. That's what the Ukrainians are fighting towards. They're trying to push the Russians back. The Russians are in this embankment where they've got some serious dugout tunnels and whatnot, but I think the Ukrainians appear to have broadly pushed the Russians out of those dugouts along most of this railway line now. So it's going to be a case of then gradually pushing them back further towards this road that comes in from or comes into Opitny, just to the south of Bakhmut. Okay, so that is the gains shown there. Now, here we have something else that came out today. Ukrainian soldier informs me, Astraya Intel, that the railway has been crossed east of Andriivka. Interestingly, he also mentions that the enemy is bringing in reinforcements from other operational sectors. Now, I'd love to know where they're bringing forces from here, whether that is up from Seversk, whether it's up further north from Crimea area. But they are bringing reinforcements here. They do not want to lose this at all. In fact, Andrew Perpetua had some interesting observations about they're desperate to hold onto this road, and that is one of the things that the Russians are fighting really hard to keep, which is why the Ukrainians have found it so difficult to push down here. We have seen some success further to the northwest, but this is a road that they would dearly like. They also talk. Andrew Perpetua talked on the live stream about how there's this hill here that the Ukrainians, they got so far and then they kind of stopped. You've got the Russians here, the Ukrainians there, and it's actually quite clear between both sides, and both sides can basically just shoot ATGMs, anti-tank guided missiles at each other. So it's a bit of a stalemate there. It will be quite difficult, quite open for either side to try and attack the other side. And of course, we then have a trench line built along here. And this is the thing about the Russians is, you can see everywhere they're just building trench lines willy-nilly and have been for some time, and that allows them to have greater defensive capabilities. Right, so that's Bakhmut for now. I don't think there's anything in the ISW that's particularly engaging, so we'll move on to Avdiivka now, and quite a bit to say here. There's a few movements, as according to some. So let's go to a few of the sources. ISW says not too much, usual repelled attacks here and there, Keremik, Avdiivka, Pervomaisky, Mariinka, Novomakhilivka, those two are further to the south. Russian MOD claimed that Russian forces repelled Ukrainian attacks near Nevelsky and Krasnohorivka. So possibly some Ukrainian attacks near Nevelsky, which is there to the south of Avdiivka. Now this, remember, we're looking at the blue lines that are the furthest to the east in this particular area. These are just, they'll be merged later, apologies. But there are some, so Poulet-Vallon has said that actually in Nevelsky area, the Ukrainians have taken some land back there. Whether that's off the grey zone or whether it's taking it from the Russians, I don't quite know there, but some success for the Ukrainians in that regard. As you can see, the Andrew Perpetua's blue line is quite a bit further back from Syriac Maps' red line here in the Nevelsky area. So that is, I think, significant. The Ukrainians have been trying really hard to push down towards Pisky for a couple of months now, and they have had some success pushing the Russians back. The Russians have tried counterattacks and lost a huge amount of armor in this area. I mean, a serious amount of armor over a number of different counterattacks. And then there was that weird one where there was some people ran out of a tank and some guy took all his clothes off and ran off, and we're trying to work out exactly what was going on there, whether he had some like hot liquid on him or something, but it was a bizarre bit of footage. That was around the Pisky area, so some success for the Ukrainians in that regard. Well, Syriac Maps does say that the situation northwest of Donetsk here, so this is around the Nevelsky area, just not quite as far as Andrew Perpetua would have it. During the last few days, the Ukrainian army retook a series of positions northeast of Nevelsky as a result of positional battles with the Russian army. Now, that is, or maybe we haven't got that one updated yet. No, that is, looks like that's about here. So around this area, all of these tree lines, I mean, we always say that all tree lines are dug out. It's just crazy trench lines everywhere. But actually, Nevelsky particularly is one of these areas where every tree line is difficult. You've got these little fortifications. That one, I think, was called was it the reservoir? Or something like that, or the bathhouse or something. I can't quite remember. But that you had the little elements, and you can see even from the 2018 photography here, satellite imagery, that the trench lines were there back then. Well, now they'll be even more widespread. This is a very difficult area for either side to take, even though it just looks like open fields. So any kind of gain is actually more significant than you might think here, and it acts as a really useful buffer zone for the Ukrainians to have that. And then as we come further to the south here, we go past Mariinka, where there's still repelled attacks and all sorts going on. And then we have some Ukrainian gains around here, as according to Syriac Maps. And that's what you can see here. Situation south of Donetsk city. The Ukrainian army continues advancing northeast of Novomakhilivka and is slowly approaching the 2014 line. Now, Syriac Maps doesn't have here what Andrew Perpetua has in terms of this long tree line that the Russians had taken control of, although we have seen that squeezed over the last week where they've been pushed further back, whereas it was a lot wider, encompassing, I think, that fortification as well. That's now sort of grey zone. So the difference between the mappers there, Syriac Map has some success for the Ukrainians in that general area. But my guess is that no attacks really around the front line are huge, heavy attacks like you would expect in the midst of a counteroffensive. I think it's all there is heavy fighting, obviously, and it's not to belittle any of the fighting, but it's not. There's a few places like Robotyne where it's all kind of happening, but even there you wonder, how long the intensity of that fighting can continue. Right, as we come down past Vuhledar, we're going to come onto the sort of more southerly Donetsk area, and here we have some gains for the Ukrainians in the Novomayorsky area. If I can find that here, no, that's Uruzhaini. Bear with me 2 ticks. Yeah, it's actually in the ISW. So here you can see some rejigs or minor Ukrainian gains. I actually say it is minor Ukrainian gains around here. So geolocated footage published yesterday indicates that Ukrainian forces marginally advanced northwest of Novomayorsk. This is an area where they have tried attacking before. Again, Andrew Perpetua talked about this last night, where the Ukrainians have actually lost quite a high number of MRAPs and other sort of vehicles that they use to taxi the troops here. Not so much used in offensive ways, the vehicles themselves, but the Ukrainians did try and sort of move into Novomayorsky, take it, and then push the Russians out. It would be a really useful place for them to take, and obviously it would make Novodonetsk untenable for the Russians to hold. But they've been unable to do so. It seemed that eventually they were repelled, even though they were fighting within the settlement itself. Well, here they could have some more gains. Let's look at the geolocated footage. This is actually this geolocated footage from Geraman, a bit of a dubious, very pro-Russian source, but here saying Pacific Fleet Marine is attacking Ukrainian trenches anywhere around Novomayorsky. So that means that the Ukrainians are in these trenches in order for them to be attacked. So this is a pro-Russian source saying, hey, look, the Russians are attacking here. So saying, whoop-de-doo, but actually that itself shows potential. Yeah, so that shows an advance for the Ukrainians if the Ukrainians are in that position and they are being attacked by the Russians there. So that's interesting. That's further back than either of the lines suggest, and that is what ISW is saying there. So that is a slight advance for the Russians there. As we go a little bit to the east, we're going to go to Uruzhaini. So that's worth knowing that there's still fighting for that to some degree. We're going to have a look at Uruzhaini here, where the Russians have recently lost a vast amount of equipment, or quite a lot of equipment on. Andrew Perpetua was saying wasn't sure whether it was one day or several days, or one whole incident, or maybe several incidents in one day or whatever, but there were several lines of attack where they just lost an awful lot. Surat Maps is saying there's some gains here for the Russians. Situation southwest of Donetsk. This is Russian army making small advances east of Uruzhaini, and the attacks I was telling you about here is the evidence of some of the vehicles lost on the 28th of September. Newly arrived 58th Motorized Brigade, a Magyar drone unit and artillery repulsed a Russian attack, destroying at least 5 tanks and 2 BMPs. FPV drones, javelin mortars and new cluster shells were used. And I'm not sure there's actually more equipment destroyed in very close proximity to that as well. ISW says Russian Mill blogger claimed that there are unconfirmed reports of Russian forces advance 100 to 150 meters east of Uruzhaini, and that would be what Surat Maps is showing, indicating with their mapping, where elements of the Russian 36th Combined Arms Army are operating. Whether they have advanced, I don't know, but that's certainly the Russian claims that there are some advances there. And then a few gains for the Ukrainians up here as well, although that's not particularly talked about by Surat Maps, but a little bit of advance for the Ukrainians and pushing the Russians back further towards Pryutny. North of Pryutny, there's been activity happening pretty much every day for the last week or so, and the Russians did make some gains there, as according to both mappers in that general area, and it could be that Ukrainians are starting to push back. And then we come to Robotna, where it's all happening, but it's not happening particularly quickly, and that comes to some consternation for pro-Ukrainian voices. So here we have some gains for the Ukrainians, both mappers agreeing that there are some Ukrainian gains to the north of Verbove, northwest of Verbove, between Pokrovka and Verbove. So that's good news for the Ukrainians there. There is evidence that they are still sort of operating on the outskirts or marginally inside some of these towns. Suryat Maps here says, situation on the Zaporizhzhia front. During the last hours, the Russian army managed to recapture some positions north of Novoprokopivka. So there are some trench lines and tree lines north of there. On the other hand, Ukrainian army retook a series of positions north of Verbove, and we've kind of looked at that. So actually, according to Suryat Maps, the Russians, the Ukrainians don't have any purchase in Novoprokopivka at all, which it might be slightly different, as according to other mappers, Andrew Perpetua, there could be some Ukrainian presence right on the outskirts there, or grey zone more likely. See what the ISW has to say. So ISW assessed on October the 1st that Ukrainian forces lost positions southwest of Robotna into Russian counterattacks between September 13th and 30th. ISW is updating our assessment, so they're going back on what they claimed. However, based on new footage published on October the 2nd and satellite imagery, which indicates that Ukrainian forces still hold these positions and have held them sometime between September the 12th and September the 17th. So that is southwest of Robotna, so that is going to be in this kind of area, I would assume. Now, what's interesting about that, even without knowing exactly what they're talking about, the fact that they really haven't moved since September the 12th to 14th is a lack of serious movement in this area for over 2 weeks. Now, when I've been saying, well, it looks like they're kind of culminated, that's kind of what culmination would look like. There's absolutely no momentum anymore. For all the reasons we know, it's really difficult to get momentum when you don't have close air support. In fact, when the Russians actually have air superiority. So you're trying to attack when Ka-52 attack helicopters can take out your armament, but take out your armor that's supporting you. It's so difficult. It's just crazy, and this is why things like ATACMS, having those cluster ATACMS before the counteroffensive to take out air bases full of Ka-52 attack helicopters would have been rather nice, thank you very much, but alas, it was not to be. So I think personally it's going to be very difficult for the Ukrainians to advance in meaningful ways here. I'm not trying to be negative, but the positive is I think Ukrainians are in a much better position than the Russians. I think they just need to shape the battlefield for the spring, personally, and that's that. Unless the Russians really are close to crumbling in some key areas, which is absolutely eminently possible, and it could be that at some point the Russians capitulate, and then you can bring in things like your Challenger 2s and maybe some Abrams are coming online, and your Leopard 2s, and you burst through and you make something of it. But how realistic is that, given that they haven't really moved for a couple of weeks? I don't know. Let me know what you think. Now, I don't want to be all doom and gloom. I'm not. I'm fairly buoyed up about the Ukrainian situation. I just don't think it's worth them pressing too much if the attrition isn't as beneficial as it could otherwise be. But as ever, let me know what you guys think. Russian forces did not advance, as according to the ISW, anywhere in this region. And Kherson is still being hit by KAB 500 bombs. And this is one of the issues. So I talked about Patriots. John Ridge had a who's often cast his opinion on air defenses and whatnot, is talking about exactly what I was talking about in an extra, which actually you probably won't see for 3 days because of the way my extras are being released at the moment due to the demonetization of the channel. But I was talking that I've long said there should be a Patriot system placed somewhere near Zaporizhzhia, so it has reach over the front lines here, and you defend that Patriot with everything you can. So you put Gepards around it, whatever. But realistically, for me, it's so important because you need to be able to invalidate the Russian Air Force from flying anywhere around here, so they can't attack Ka-52 attack helicopters, can't attack armor, but also if you can possibly get the range to take out your Su-34s or whatever from dropping KAB or FAB 500 bombs, that would be really super useful, because they are an absolute nuisance right along Kherson and right along the southern front line. In fact, if you look at Andrew Perpetua's maps, there are bombing icons just every day all over the shop, and they are a really serious threat to Ukraine that at the moment Ukraine doesn't have an answer for. Without the F-16s with longer air-to-air missile capabilities, out of sight kind of shooting, then without that, there's just not a lot the Ukrainians can do. And so therefore Russians are really using these FAB 500s with impunity, and they're having devastating consequences right up and down the front line. Now, just a couple of opinions on how things are going. Mesa Gifford, who's someone I'd love to interview, actually, he's gone back out there. He's a British sort of volunteer that's played a few different roles out there. Great things are happening. I can't wait to share more information with you soon. It's pretty full on at the moment. There's been a lot of movement across the front line. Keep supporting our troops. We literally can't do this without you. I have no idea what he's talking about, though, whether great things definitely on the front line, like militarily, tactically, strategically, or whether he's talking about other random things. I don't know, but nonetheless he seems rather positive, which is you try and get all these bits of the jigsaw and find out how people on the front are feeling about things. Kenneth Gregg, the Finnish fighter that has been fighting over in Ukraine, is now doing more charity work, says good frontline news and hopeful anti-corruption measures. At Andriivka, we have taken control of the railway and are expanding further east. The Russians have gone all in on this section, but still they have to retreat. So we heard that they are bringing reinforcements to that area. So we're going back up to Andriivka, to the south of Klishchiivka, south of Bakhmut here. Just the final thing I'll say, 2 kilometers further east from the contact line, they are now frantically trying to build fortifications for the winter at Odrodivka. If we succeed with an attack maneuver up on the northern side of Bakhmut at Yahidne, the Russian troops inside the gravel pits, the gravel pile at Bakhmut, will be wiped out during the winter. So much is needed to achieve this. So he's saying that, first of all, the Ukrainians are pushing the Russians back to this road that I've been talking about, and they are frantically trying to build defensive lines in the Odrodivka area. They have larger... this was kind of the time Surovikin was building the defences. They built larger defences much further back from Bakhmut, but none of those large and significant trenches built closer. And then around Yahidne is saying that if we can punch in there, then it'll be tough for the Russians during the winter. Just to cap off what you said, so to Novelska in the Donetsk region, the area is cleared of Russians. They tried for a few days to take back the lost positions. I previously said that this is where the Russians had their best chance to start something that could be called an offensive. This is because they have maintenance routes directly from the east without much risk of being ambushed. Why they insist on this up at Kupiansk can only be due to one thing. They want to tie our troops as far away from Zaporizhia as possible. So he's basically saying that actually the Russians have got pretty good supply into this Andriivka area, and had they really pushed here, maybe closed off Andriivka, so that would be one of the best moves for Russia, best use of their time and resources. But instead they've done all this kind of messing around up in Kupiansk area and up in Novoherivka area, just there actually, that he's questioning what the worth of that was, and that's a pretty valid question, to be honest. At Novoprokopivka, we have now advanced a considerable distance, and it will not be long before we have liberated the village. Now it was the Russians 70th and 210th motorized rifle brigades that had to withdraw. This is now the second time in 2 weeks that the Russian units have had to leave their positions. Right now we have 3 kilometers to this front's Surovikin line. When we get there, we will have control of a total of 15 kilometers of this heavily fortified line. If the offensive should stop for the winter, we already have ready-made defense lines to use. We just need to face them to the east. So this is to go back to here. That is to say, in Novoprokopivka, if you can get back to take this town and then take these these trenches, then that would be a good place to stop for the winter, and you would be able to, do with a bit of adjustment, make these trenches useful for defending from the other direction. Of course, naturally, they're not great for that straight off, so you probably have to make some alterations. So at Verbovia, our attacks on the Russians are ongoing, especially at night. It has appeared to us that their night vision is not as good as we thought. Two things are working against us: a huge mountain of meat there and a huge amount of Chinese kamikaze drones. We have until now had the advantage with this type of weapon, but now we are equal. Other front lines are as before. We can see now that the Russian offensive capacity is practically zero. They defended using the elite forces reserved for offensive attacks, yet they were pushed back and worn out. So this is the positive outlook here, is that the Russians, this is what I'm saying, I don't think the Russians have serious capability of doing a counterattack of their own in most places, if at all, and even if they do, it'll be with poorly trained, cobbled together troops without great morale or equipment. So that is a good sign. Even Kenneth Gregg is talking about, setting up for the winter around here. So I think that is significant. But he seems fairly positive. So there are, it's about managing expectations, isn't it? Anyway, that's what Kenneth Gregg has to say, and just a variety of opinions there as to what's going on. I mean, let me know what you think, whether what I've been saying about, pausing there and letting the ranged weapons do their thing for a couple of months, really lay it up for, maybe have a little push, take Novoprokopivka, as Kenneth Gregg was saying, get down to this defensive line, these trenches there. If you could do that before winter sets in, then you can reassess and see how far you can get ordnance down with things like HIMARS down to take out logistics lines around here without, you won't be able, unfortunately, to hit this coastal line, because that is about 86 kilometers. Now, technically, if you put a HIMARS there, you can hit this. Is it the M14 that comes in here? But to be honest, you'll be really risking your HIMARS sending it into a salient like that, even if you do make it a little bit wider before winter sets in. So, I mean, you could do it, be a risk. Unfortunately, I think they'd need to take a bit more land in order to get some kind of fire control over this important road. Anyway, that's all from me. Please take care. Like, subscribe, share, all that kind of stuff. Really appreciate people who have been hitting YouTube with emails and tweeting them their opinions about what's going on. Thank you so much for all your support. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.